So I've got three different stories for you guys today from Reddit. I searched around and found three of what I consider to be the more interesting stories to give you guys today. And I also realized that I don't have the greatest voice for this, but I know everyone's sick of the AI narratives, so I'm going to narrate this myself to give you guys a break from that. Speech therapist pretends to be my mother. This is a story I originally posted on a different subreddit, but figured you folks might like it over here. By the way, this is posted on Let's Not Meet 123 Copper 123. This is a situation I found out about around 8 months ago, but it has stayed in my mind ever since. For context, as a child, I had severe speech delay. I was completely mute up until a few weeks before kindergarten. This caused me to have a speech impediment, which I technically still have to this day, but to a lesser extent. I'm lucky enough that the letters I have troubled with match up with the letters often dropped in certain accents, so to the untrained ear I sound British or Australian depending on who you ask. Because of this, I often just confirm their accent assumptions because it's easier to lie about being British than to explain the speech impediment thing and face my stigma that goes with it. The only people who know the truth are very close friends and family. On to the story. I, 18 female, was dating a girl, 18 female. We are no longer seeing each other, but for reasons unrelated to the story. We are at a social event when we met up with one of her friends, 19 female. I technically have known this girl since grade 9 as well, but not very well. So we as a group get to talking. Randomly, completely unrelated to the current conversation, friend asks me how my mom is doing. I'm caught off guard because that's not usually something you throw into a conversation without knowing said mom. So I ask back, "Why, do you know her?" Friend goes on to explain that my mom used to be her EA and had helped her work out her behavioral issues all throughout elementary and middle school. Now this is weird because although my mom did work in a school for a brief time, she was a lunchtime supervisor and only ever worked in one elementary, an elementary school I know the friend didn't go to. So I asked friend if she's sure it was my mom, because she wasn't an EA. Friend confirms because my mom used to talk about me all the time, and when friend was deciding which high school to go to, my mom recommended my high school because that's the school her daughter went to. Now within my high school there were a few people with the same name as me. My name is about as basic white bitch as they come. So I asked friend, are you sure it's me who she was talking about and not one of the other people with my name? She once again confirms it was definitely me because my mom would tell her details about my life. My mom, in quotation marks here, would tell her details about my life and told her about my time going to speech therapy. Now hold up. As I said earlier, I'm very secretive about the fact that I have a speech impediment. This friend is clearly someone I have never told, although I will admit it's not impossible to guess, and the girl I was dating at the time could have told her, but I have never, and I mean never, ever, ever told anyone about going to speech therapy. That's just never a detail I share when telling my life story. It's clear that someone who knows me, like family, is telling her this stuff. There's no way friend could have accurately guessed so many details about my life. So just to confirm that somehow my real mother doesn't have a double life, I asked friend what my mother looks like. She responded that she's somewhat short with curly brown hair. This is not my mother. My mother is tall and blonde. This, though, is exactly what my first speech therapist looked like. She was hired through the school district, and I saw her for about 2 years before she switched to another school. She also works with a variety of special needs, meaning it's very likely she went on to become friend's EA. But all this to say, somewhere out there, this speech therapist is for some reason pretending to be my mother, and to some extent stalking me, as she would have had to have done research to find out which high school I went to. Additional bonus story that I remembered while writing the post. When I was a child, but after I had switched to speech therapy, I was in a store with my mother where there was a shiny blue guitar. Me, being a child and liking shiny blue things, really wanted this guitar. My mom clearly said no, as it was expensive, and I had shown little interest in playing the guitar besides watching my dad play his bass. I was disappointed but understood. Out of the blue, my first speech therapist shows up and buys the guitar for me. My mom told her she didn't have to, but my speech therapist insisted. At the time, this just seemed like a nice thing she did, albeit overly generous. But now knowing she's parading around pretending to be my real mom definitely paints the situation in a different light. I don't know how to feel about the gift now. There's not much I can do about the situation, as I don't even remember what the speech therapist's name was, so let's just hope we don't meet again. The new neighbors on my street and the lights in the window. I live alone in a little house in a big city. Kind of a rough around the edges neighborhood, but I've lived in the area most of my life, and my block is tight-knit. In spite of half of it being vacant or abandoned, it's also a city that, like many others, tragically has a lot of folks living out of cars and RVs, trying to eke out an existence. So I shouldn't have been too surprised. Back in October last year, I got a text from a neighbor. You might want to take a look out your back window. About 10 feet away was an enormous 40-foot motorhome in the dead-end alleyway sitting right on the edge of the small cliff that is my unfenced backyard. Having lived in an urban area my whole life, I'm no stranger to odd happenings immediately outside my window, but this did feel a little more intrusive than living in a ground floor apartment, no thanks to my back window being my bathroom window. It sat there for a few weeks without anyone paying much mind. A few neighbors speculated it might have been someone working on a couple demolition and construction projects in the neighborhood. A supervisor from out of town, perhaps. Whomever it was, I really didn't mind as long as there wasn't any mess, though I was slightly worried a wrong move would end with someone or the whole vehicle rolling off the retaining wall and potentially crashing through my wall. Of course, there was the small fact that half the block now couldn't access the alley. My city is very particular about removing vehicles if someone is potentially living in them, and after a few roundabout calls to the parking department, I and my neighbors were told we needed some evidence that it was a hazard or abandoned. So I grabbed a cheap webcam off Amazon, popped it in my window, and then went on with my life. About a week later, after some friends over for dinner had left, I thought I'd check and see if the camera had picked up anything. I didn't sleep for the next few nights. Like clockwork, every night around midnight, the lights in the RV would flick on, and in the otherwise pitch-black night, a couple of cars would pull up behind, and the occupants would unload several very full garbage bags into the RV. Then shadowy figures would creep down the yard of the vacant house next door into mine and methodically circle my house, shining flashlights in each window. Cars would come and go all night until about 5 a.m. Then all was business as usual during daylight hours. Worth mentioning that my house is essentially a studio apartment on top of a garage built into a slope. My bed is about 10 feet from those windows. All worth mentioning, my neighborhood had an alarm rash of about 20 armed home invasions the summer before, or the arson on an occupied house across the street a few months earlier. Vulnerable was an understatement of how I felt. I ended up moving most of my furniture around my bed as a makeshift barricade. I called 911. They were a bit incredulous. Nothing was actively happening as I called. This wasn't an emergency. I can call the non-emergency line in the morning if I want to speak to an officer or detective. The next morning, I felt it was prudent to bring in any yard tools that would make a tempting window breaker and double-check the back porch and security flood had working bulbs, and just my luck, I managed to completely break both fixtures in the process. Almost immediately, as I walked out my back door, the RV's door swung open and a man and woman stepped out. They were dressed in t-shirts and shorts, despite the 39-degree weather, and looked a bit like zombies. I waved. They didn't. They stared past me. I quickly retreated back inside to keep an eye remotely, but not before noticing something even more startling. The RV had about 6 security cameras mounted on it, 3 of which were trained on my back door. I watched them. They were watching me. After a day or two more of this, I had become fully nocturnal, leaving all the lights blazing all night, and I started to feel like I was losing my mind. This was both mostly benign and deeply unsettling. Texting friends and family in hopes of reassurance, well, didn't do much. They're probably just trying to find a place away from the encampments. Maybe they work a night shift. If you were living on the streets, wouldn't you want a security camera too? You have one on your house. Okay, maybe I was being paranoid. My parents were mostly preoccupied with the alley being blocked and subsequent missed deliveries. And it's not like the city was going to do much anyway. The cars kept coming and going all night. The people with flashlights stayed just outside the edge of my yard, but I'd catch the occasional flash through the window. After being reluctant to leave the house and my cat alone, I had to leave for an in-person work meeting. While I was gone, my camera pinged me about activity. The RV folks had set up stakes around my property and were wrapping yellow caution tape around my yard across the alley and set up a barricade of traffic cones around their vehicle. This was just getting weird. By this point, a few of us on the block started a group text to keep tabs on things. One neighbor, a few houses down, caught the female half of this duo in her backyard with a chainsaw, limbing their oak tree in broad daylight. They confronted her and she gave the same treatment as me, a mute 1,000-yard stare. That neighbor called it in, and I watched a few officers poke around for a minute, clearly puzzled by the barricades and tape. I thought there might be some imminent resolution. They then booked it back to their squad and took off with lights and sirens. There was a shooting a few blocks over. I assumed they got called to. Another night goes by, punctuated by the RV's alarm going off every couple hours and the engine revving menacingly, though nothing out of the ordinary, at least this ordinary. I take my mid-morning nap I've become accustomed to over the past week, only to be awoken by loud, angry yelling. I pulled up the camera feed. Out back is another neighbor, the goofy dad, cum ex-naval officer, venting his frustrations to a police officer who's banging the RV door with a baton, demanding the occupants come out. There's a brand new sports car parked behind, one that I'd barely made out on my cheap camera's night vision. I carefully left out the front so as not to be inconspicuous and circled up the mouth of the alley to speak with the officer, and explained my story in a near stream of conscious rambling. Did you see them leave? Nope. I played back the camera. The sports car showed up around 5:30 a.m. and nobody had left since. He said the car was too new to have a current registration and the RV was registered to a deceased person 4 counties away. Suspicious, but not outright criminal. But he ticketed them within a 24-hour tow notice. He was typing up the ticket. As he was typing up the ticket, the sports car came barreling down the alley in reverse, nearly plowing into the cruiser, and I was told very sternly to leave immediately. I ran home and pulled up a police scanner feed to try and glean some information. They were calling for a gang officer, a domestic violence unit, vice squad, CSI. So my gut feeling wasn't too far off the mark. Later that night, the officer called me asking to send the entirety of my footage. I asked if there was anything he could divulge about what was happening. I can't tell you much, but this was a bad dude and he's going away. We towed the car as evidence, but we'll have to wait until morning to get enough truck to move the RV. To get a big enough truck to move the RV. To say I slept well that night was an understatement. But that calm was shattered quite literally early the next morning as I heard glass breaking outside. 3 masked men were breaking into the RV with crowbars. One was up on a ladder, sawing through the roof with an angle grinder. I frantically called 911, struggling to explain the context of what was going on. Once again met with a verbal eye roll from the call taker. Is it your RV, sir? No, you can't report a stolen vehicle that isn't yours. I hung up and tried again, hoping to get someone else on the other end. We have a record dispatched to that location. Are you sure these aren't the tow operators? Sure enough, just as these guys managed to get the RV started, the tow truck was coming around the corner. They booked it so fast it ripped up the gravel. It's a miracle it didn't end up through someone's wall. Well, whatever. The absolute fuck hell happened is seemingly over. Seemingly. Again, seemingly. I suppose this is an epilogue of words, and by far the most unsettling part of this story. I quickly upgraded my chintzy camera to a couple commercial-grade ones with smart object detection, synchronized floodgates, and automatic sirens, hoping I'd rest easy. No, it was going off all the time. at least once or twice a week for over a month, and the cameras caught creeps skulking around my backyard and windows with flashlights, plenty of other cars idling with the lights off in the alley for unsettlingly long periods. The one I can't shake was the guy at 3 a.m. slowly making his way up the alley in a low crouch, taking a long pause directly behind my house and then booking it towards my door full steam. Or the guy that managed to get past the camera and I came face to face with his ugly mug pressed up against my kitchen window at midnight. At least the alarms did their job. Every one of these guys took off once lit up like a stadium with sirens blaring, but some comic relief that last guy tried to hop a retaining wall and face planted on the other side. Of course, again, friends and family had some not so reassuring platitudes. Maybe it was someone looking for a lost dog, or someone get lost in the alley, or maybe this just always happens before I had lights and cameras, and shaking what little faith I had in law enforcement, the cops, if they showed up at all, were at least an hour late. But here's the kicker. I filed a public request for the arrest and case report and got it back months later. Turns out my neighbor in the RV had kidnapped his ex-girlfriend, was likely trafficking her. She, in fact, called 911 but didn't know the neighborhood, and the cops were looking for them in a different part of town. He had a lengthy rap sheet for felony burglary, fraud, and firearm charges. An acquaintance of his was interviewed by the detectives and said that the RV was packed to the gills with guns and improvised weapons. And this guy told this witness that he would come back and kill whoever sent him back to jail. And right at the bottom, in all caps, was my name and address, but phone number redacted, listed as reporting party complaint. The cops searched the sports car and found nothing of note. The RV, as you recall, was apparently stolen before they could even get a valid warrant. The ex fled during the arrest, as I saw on camera, and was never heard from again. The DA dropped the case, and this guy was released from jail 48 hours later. It's been 6 months since my last visitor at night. There hasn't been a whole lot of peace of mind before I turned in for the night. It's slowly fading, but I can't say I'm not a little on edge after dark, even in my own home. My house is now completely lit, 360 degrees. I've put various dense and or spiky plantings around my windows and the perimeter, and I sleep with a rifle next to my bed. But unfortunately, new folks have moved into the vacant houses on either side of me, and they're also good people. I just don't know if I have the heart to tell them what all went down. Okay, man asked to take before photos. This happened in August of 2013. I was visiting Montreal for their Diver City weekend, which was basically like Pride, but took place the long weekend before the official Montreal Pride. My best friend at the time had met a guy at Toronto Pride a month earlier, and he invited both of us to come there so my friend wouldn't be uncomfortable going to spend the weekend with someone he didn't know well. We arrived on Thursday, and the trip was going great. We went out the first night, walked the street that were closed off to the cars the next day, and our host made us a nice dinner, and then we went out again Friday night. Now, I just had to make sure this is working. Yeah, it's working. Okay. I recorded this entire video already once, and it didn't save, so. Okay, we arrived on Thursday night. The trip was going great. We went out for the first night, walked the streets that were closed. Oh. Just a quick note before I get into what happened. I partied quite a bit with drugs at this time, and I also, in the past, had a tendency to lose my cell phone. So for about a year prior, I stopped taking my cell phone whenever I went out. So that Friday night, we went out to a club, Parking, which sadly has since closed, and it was another fun night. Okay, so the club was called Parking, I'm assuming. The music was great, and the tequila shots were incredibly cheap. I was dancing and moving all around the club, but would circle back and check in with my friend and our host, and I would also run into people that I knew who were also visiting from Toronto, and ended up taking some MDMA from one of them. Danced some more until I was completely soaked in sweat, so I went to the bathroom to wipe myself down and pee. When I got into the bathroom, there was someone leaving, but it looked like I was the only one in there. I went and used the stall because I have a hard time using the urinal, and when I came out, I was quite surprised to see a man in the corner of the washroom smiling at me. He looked in his mid-30s, on the shorter side, and a bit chubby. He was wearing a polo shirt and jeans and had glasses. I remember thinking when I saw he reminded me of an accountant. Not sure why that thought popped in my head. I was pretty sure I didn't hear the door, but I couldn't be sure, so I just smiled back and said hello as I went to wash my hands. "Hello," he responded. "Are you having fun tonight?" I replied I was, and that the music was incredible, and was wiping myself down with paper towels and my shirt. "Do you want to do some coke with me?" he asked. Now, this was not the first time I'd been offered coke in a bathroom at a nightclub, and had done this in the past, and ended up having some good experiences, and met some interesting people, so I was already high and drunk and not thinking much of it. I said, "Sure, I would love to, thanks. I just live right near here. It's at my place if you don't mind coming over. We can do some lines and have a drink, then walk back to the club," he replied. Now, obviously, looking back, I realize how very dumb my following actions were, and I can't imagine myself being so stupid and careless now. But without thinking about it, I agreed, and I left with him. The club allowed you to re-enter if you had a wristband. We chatted on the walk over to his place. He asked me where I was from, because I didn't seem like I was from Montreal, and what parties I had gone to, and how old I was, and my name. I asked his name, but he instead responded that we had arrived. The whole while felt like 5 minutes, but I honestly hadn't been paying much attention to where we were walking. His apartment was in the building that had 3 floors, and his unit was on the 2nd floor, and you had to climb this long, narrow metal staircase, and his door seemed to be in the middle of 2 other apartments on either side. He unlocked the door and let me in first, flicked on the lights and told me to make myself comfortable. I was walking and noticed he had carpet, so I turned around to ask him if I should take my shoes off when I noticed that he was locking the door from the inside with a key above the regular lock. And in that moment, I was overwhelmed with a feeling of dread, like I'd never felt before. The danger I had possibly put myself in another city, no phone, nobody knows where I am, and now seeing this person locking the door from the inside with a key. I just thought to myself, I'll pretend I didn't see that, I won't take off my shoes, and politely hang out for a few minutes, then ask to head back. I also thought I could be having an extreme overreaction to what I saw because I was high. But as I looked around, everything inside of me was just screaming, "You need to get out of here." I went and sat on the arm of the couch. He said I should take off my shoes and relax. I was getting better look at him now in the light of his apartment. He still looked plain and unassuming, but his eyes looked shifty, and he pulled down both of the shades on the windows that were on each side of the door. I told him that I was okay and I was eager to get back to dancing, so he said he would make us drinks, then we could go back. The apartment looked much bigger inside than it did from the street. It was an open layout with the living room beside the kitchen and then a hallway in the middle with closed doors, painted black, and I could hear music coming from one of the doors. I asked him if someone else was there as he came from the kitchen with a glass, and he replied no. As he handed me a glass, he looked up and down. I wasn't wearing a shirt. He said with this increasingly creepy smile spreading across his face, "You have a very beautiful body, especially your chest. Would you mind if I took some before shots before we went back? Every alarm bell in my head started going off, and now all I can think about is Jeffrey Dahmer and all his Polaroids, and what am I going to do, because this was such a creepy thing to say, and all I can manage is a polite laugh as I take the drink and say, "Sure." "Excellent," he says, and then tells me to take off my shoes, and he is going to get the coke and his camera and to finish my drink. He walked down the hall, takes out his keys and unlocks the 2nd door and opens the door enough to slip in and closes it behind him. The second that door was closed, I jumped up, ran over to the sink and dumped my drink. Put my shirt on, it had been tied around the belt loop of my shorts, and ran to the front door. I was able to turn and unlock the regular lock, but the door would not budge. I kept turning and pulling, but nothing. Then I heard from behind me, "What are you doing?" I turned around and he was standing at the base of the hallway with one of those professional cameras slung around his neck, holding a square mirror with a pile of white powder on it. I thanked him for the drink, gesturing to my empty glass, but that it was getting late and I wanted to get back, but we could exchange numbers and maybe meet up tomorrow. His demeanor slightly changed. He was still smiling, but his tone when he next spoke sounded irritated. He asked me if I was nervous about taking the photos and I should just wait for my drink to relax me, and I said no, that I wanted to go. This exchange of him telling me to stay and me saying no back and forth for about a minute when he suddenly glared at me and put down the mirror, pointed at the couch and said, "Sit down." Not knowing what to do or how I was going to get out of this, I remembered that there were other units on each side of us, and it had to be around 2:30 in the morning at this point, so I just started screaming at the top of my lungs like a madman, banging on the door, the window, the wall. "Shut up, be quiet," he snapped at me as he ran to the door. He quickly unlocked and told me to get out and stepped aside. I bolted out the door, down the steps, skipping the bottom steps and hopping over the side of the railing. I looked up behind when I landed and he wasn't there, but I heard a door slam and took off running down the street. I hadn't paid attention on the walk there, so I didn't know which way to walk, but I knew it was close, and luckily I was able to wave down a passing taxi and take it back to the bar. When I got back to the bar, I found my friend in the same spot, dancing. The whole incident must have been less than half an hour. I was too embarrassed about how stupid I'd been being back in the club. I started to feel bad that I had just freaked out on this nice man, so I didn't say anything, but I stayed by his side until we left shortly after I got back. The entire thing felt quite surreal, and I remember the next day when I did tell my friend, kind of laughing it off and joking about getting murdered and trying to make light of it because it was so scary, and it wasn't until years later, after joining Reddit and this sub and reading other stories, that I started to think about that night more and more and realized how much potential danger I put myself in. So strange, man, from the bathroom that lured me to his place and wanted to take before photos of me. Let's never meet again. So strange, man. So strange, man, from the bathroom that lured me to his place and wanted to take before photos. Let's not meet ever again.